So far, we have covered the beginnings of human civilization from the agricultural revolution through to Egypt, Mesopotamia, ancient India and China, as well as Assyria, Babylon, and Persia. So today we're going to talk about what's known as the classical era, which roughly speaking is 600 BC through about 600 AD. More commonly put, it is the Greco-Roman era, so the time of ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and those are the two major civilizations we're going to be talking about today. So, Greece came first. Greece had existed for hundreds of years at this point as the global center of cultural achievement and progress. It was really the place to be if you were an academic or an artist or an educator or a musician. This was the cultural hub of achievement and progress in the world. And there are a lot of different areas that Greece succeeded in and set examples for future artists and educators. So Greece produced some of the most beautiful art of all time, some of the most influential art and architecture of all time. They invented things like columns and triangular pediments. Maybe you've seen that at the top of the White House. Arches and domes were created around this time. And as far as art goes, the kind of realistic marble sculptures that you've probably seen before, that all started with ancient Greece as well. Greek literature really laid the foundation of the genre of literature in general. For example, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey are absolutely foundational. If you choose to be an English major or a literature major, those are going to be some of the first works you read just because of how consequential they were to the rest of literature that followed. The Olympics started in Greece, as did the theater. So if you are an actor, if you are an athlete, you owe your beginnings to ancient Greece as well. Historians like Herodotus and Thucydides, they really transformed the study of history. So historians, really, we date our profession back to ancient Greece also. Then we get to philosophy. So the word philosophy basically means the study of knowledge, the study of reality, the study of existence itself. This began in ancient Greece. One of the first philosophers, one of the most famous, his name is Socrates. Here are a couple of important quotes from him. He said, question everything. He believed in investigation. Don't just blindly believe something, but check it out, look into it, question every idea that you have been told to see if there's evidence for it. Another one of his quotes is the only true thing to know is to know that you know nothing. Or that's the mark of true wisdom, he said, is to know that you know nothing. Basically, an awareness that there is so much knowledge out there that we don't possess, so we need to be kind of humble and always willing to learn. Socrates was killed, actually, for, quote, corrupting the youth of Athens. He was made to drink poison because he was questioning all sorts of ideas that the government in Athens held dear, including democracy. So he was seen as a threat. But his apprentice, Plato, wrote down his teachings, and Plato had a lot of teachings of his own. He famously said, man is a being in search of meaning, and that meaning in life is what really drives us forward. It's what keeps us going. It's our chief desire, Plato said. And then Plato's apprentice was named Aristotle. He famously said, the roots of education are bitter, but the fruit is sweet. I think that's a great quote, especially for learners like you all, that sometimes it's tough to learn. It's tough to memorize things. Sometimes things are not easy to hear, and the work is hard, but at the end, the fruit is sweet. Having wisdom, having discernment and understanding and knowledge is very, very beneficial to living a full and happy life. All three of these philosophers spoke and wrote a lot about the importance of knowledge, the importance of wisdom, the importance of ethics. One of Aristotle's most famous works is called Nicomachean Ethics, and it's all about what is right, what is wrong, what do we owe to each other. They wrote about love and believing in things that we cannot see. They wrote a lot about the supernatural too. Socrates came up with the Socratic method, maybe something you've done in a class before, or you might do in a class in the future. The Socratic method is basically when you try to ask questions about every aspect of an idea or of an assumption to try to get to the root of it and basically make someone defend what they believe, and then you do the same for things that you believe. Plato and Aristotle also founded the world's first ever universities, Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum. Governmentally, Greece was organized into city-states, which basically means that each city was its own government. Athens was its own government, Sparta was its own government, they had their own laws and everything like that. Now, Athens was the first democracy in history. This is where the Greeks gave birth to democracy, something that we cherish in the 21st century. This is the first place where it was tried. Now, Persia and Greece had been warring for centuries. Remember, last time we talked about Cyrus the Great of Persia, how he conquered most of the Middle East, and then the Persian kings after him also went to war with Greece, and they were warring for a very long time, Persia being the much larger of the two civilizations. And the Greco-Persian wars took place throughout the 400s BC, and these included a couple of famous battles, including the Battle of Marathon and the Battle of Thermopylae. So with the Battle of Marathon, the Persians invaded Athens. Athens then sent someone who could run really fast to Sparta to get help. And the exact mileage that he ran was 26.2 miles, hence the name of the marathon. If you know anyone who's run a marathon, that's where we get that from. The Battle of Thermopylae, that's where the 300 Spartans held off the invading Persians for 7 days. There was a famous movie made about that back when I was in high school called 300. That's part fiction, but part truth as well. Now, the Greeks finally won the Greco-Persian Wars, which means that the Persians retreated and declined from power. Then, the Greek city-states turned on themselves. Since they didn't have a common enemy anymore, they turned on themselves. And this was called the Peloponnesian War. And this was fought between the Greek city-states, so between Athens and Sparta and Thebes, etc. It was a very chaotic time until Philip II of Macedon, the king of Macedon, ended the war by abolishing the entire city-state system. He said this system is too chaotic, it lends itself to civil war, and therefore we're just going to have one kingdom with, you guessed it, me as the ruler. So he united Greece as one monarchy, but what that also did was it took democracy away, and democracy would not reemerge in human history for about 2,000 years. So this brought a lot of changes to Greece, and Philip II's son, Alexander, would bring even more. So Alexander was a really special person. He was tutored by Aristotle, and he became king in the year 336 BC at the age of 20. So he was seen to be destined for great things from a very young age. And immediately once becoming king at 20, he said, I am going to make Greece an empire. So he went to war with Persia and conquered the formerly invincible Persian Empire. He then conquered Egypt, a place that hadn't been conquered for thousands of years. And his empire eventually stretched from Greece all the way to the border of India, as you see on the map there. So his empire was even larger than the Persian Empire had been. He also famously never lost a battle, which is why so many people after him tried to model his battle tactics, because who doesn't want to be undefeated? In 323 BC, at the very young age of 32, he died of a fever. Not the way that you would expect a valiant warrior to die, right? But he died very young, he died of a fever, and his massive kingdom split into three. And this is because while Alexander was really good at conquering land, he was not very good at governing the land that he conquered. And this is a pretty common problem that you see with a lot of warriors. They're only concerned with expanding their territory, going for quantity, not so much about quality of where they govern. And because of that, his empire, yes, it was huge, but it was also very unstable. If you remember, back when we were talking about New Kingdom Egypt, we talked about the female pharaoh Hatshepsut, who intentionally kept Egypt small and well connected through trade so as not to fall into this issue of expanding too much and then becoming unstable. So Greek dominance was very short-lived. It only lasted a couple of decades, and then his kingdom really split apart. when he died. But since then, military and political leaders from Julius Caesar to Pompey to even Napoleon really modeled their behavior after Alexander. And this continued for thousands of years because people hoped to emulate his success. But with the fall of Greece, this led to the rise of Rome, the second great empire that we're going to talk about today. So just to oversimplify this, to get it kind of clear in our minds first, ancient Rome existed for about 1,000 years, from around 500 BC to around 500 AD. And for the first half of that, for the first 500 years or so, before the birth of Christ, Rome was a republic. A republic is very similar to a democracy where you elect leaders that make decisions for you. All right, so for the first 500 years rather, Rome was a republic. And then for the last 500 years, so about 500 years after the birth of Christ, Rome was an empire with one ruler, one emperor or Caesar, controlling the entire empire. And I have the exact dates up there for you if you want to know with a little bit more specificity. Class distinctions in ancient Rome were the patricians and the plebeians. There were basically just two classes. The patricians were the elites, the people who served in the government, who were in the high society, had land, had money, had citizenship. And then the plebeians were everyone else, and that was the majority of people who did not have the same kind of rights as the patricians. Now, the Roman Republic was governed with two branches of government. So in America, we have three branches of government for checks and balances. And in the Roman Republic, they too were very worried that someone might get too powerful. Okay, they were very wary of giving anyone too much power. And so they made two branches of government, and they even split one of their branches into two. So their first branch was the Senate. The Senate was the body of patricians who made the laws. And then they would elect two co-consuls. A consul was kind of like the president, but you would have two of them at the same time. So they could kind of keep each other in check and not let the other one get too powerful. And the consuls would enforce the laws and lead the military. Consuls only served for 1 year. They did not want anyone to be in power for too long. The Senate was very cautious about absolute power. One famous philosopher from the time of the Roman Republic was a guy named Marcus Tullius Cicero, a brilliant writer. If you ever want to read something about friendship, about the value of friendship, I highly recommend his book on friendship. But he was a Roman senator and a philosopher. He said, quote, "Friendship improves happiness and abates misery by doubling our joys and dividing our grief." Just brilliant there. So we've learned about several philosophers so far. We learned about Confucius, who was in ancient China. Then we learned about Siddhartha Gautama from ancient India. We learned about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle in ancient Greece. And here we have Cicero in ancient Rome. So all of this led up to the time of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was really the person who transformed the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. It took place because of what he did during his lifetime. So he was a patrician. He served in the Roman Republic as general for a long time. Then he was a senator. And then he served as consul for a year. As general, he conquered the territory of Gaul, which you see at the top in the orange, modern-day France. He then overthrew the Roman consul Pompey after his attempted arrest. After Julius Caesar was consul, he went back to the military, continued to fight wars, but then the newly elected consul, Pompey, who was his former friend, he tried to arrest Caesar because he saw him as a threat. Well, Caesar had an army with him, so he invaded his hometown of Rome and overthrew Pompey and became the leader himself. Caesar, once he overthrew Pompey, did not just declare himself consul, he declared himself permanent consul. And remember, consuls could only serve for 1-year terms. So by saying he was the permanent consul, that was basically like saying he was the new dictator in town. And with the help of his trusted aide, Mark Antony, and allied with Cleopatra of Egypt, if you've ever heard those names, he was able to consolidate this power and really have all of the Roman Republic under his regime. But the Roman Senate was very fearful of Caesar. They thought he had become too powerful, and because of that, they plotted to kill him, and they stabbed him to death on the floor of the Roman Senate, in order to save the Republic. They said, we're doing this for the Republic in order to prevent someone from getting too powerful and therefore too corrupt. But what they did not realize is how popular Caesar was. The Senate thought that once they killed Caesar, the people would say, oh, good, good, all right, I'm really glad you did that. Now we can go back to the consul system. Not so much. People really liked Caesar. He was popular among the Roman people, especially the plebeians, because of land reform laws, because of military successes. He helped people get out of debt and own land easier. And therefore, when he was killed, the Romans demanded another emperor, another Caesar, like him. And so his adopted son, Octavian, took over and declared himself to be Emperor Caesar Augustus. And this is what officially brought an end to the Roman Republic and established the Roman Empire. And this would remain the dominant world power for the next 500 years. Caesar Augustus established laws of dynastic succession. That means after he died, he had already set up who was going to be the next leader and who would be after that. That's what dynastic succession is called. Okay, who's going to be the next leader? And what that does is it prevents a power vacuum. It prevents everyone trying to gain power when the leader dies. Now, some Roman emperors who followed him included a guy named Nero, who was literally a madman who set fire to the city of Rome and blamed it on the Christians and killed Christians by the thousands. You also have a Roman emperor in the 2nd century named Marcus Aurelius, who was another philosopher. He famously said, the best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. So trying to be above just a kind of revenge game there, but be better than the person who wronged you. And then you have Constantine, or Constantine the Great, the emperor who Christianized Rome, who we'll get to next. Now, at its zenith, or at its peak of world prominence, the Roman Empire encapsulated 25% of the world's population. If you look at the map there, the entire Mediterranean region, over half of Europe, a lot of Asia and North Africa was a part of the Roman Empire. 25% of all people who lived on Earth lived in the Roman Empire, including a guy that I'm sure we've all heard of. Some of us believe in him as our Savior, Jesus Christ. So Jesus lived in the Roman Empire in modern-day Israel. Israel was a part of the Roman Empire at this point. And during his life, Jesus' teachings, actions, execution on the cross, and his claimed miracles, including resurrection, sparked the founding of what would become the world's largest religion, which it still is today. Now, Christianity was spread by Jesus' followers, many of whom were martyred. To be martyred means to be killed for your faith. Most of his followers were persecuted in some way. Some were even tortured and killed for following him and trying to spread the gospel, because the Roman Empire made Christianity illegal. They saw Christianity as a threat. They did not want people in the Roman Empire to have a higher allegiance than the Caesar, than the emperor, and so they made it illegal. One person who really contributed to the spread of Christianity, even though it was illegal, was a guy named Paul of Tarsus. He is also known as Saul, which was his Hebrew name, and Paul is his Greek name. And Paul converted countless people. He traveled throughout the Roman world. He was in the unique situation of being a Jew, and therefore he was familiar with the Old Testament and believed that Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament promises and prophecies. And in addition to being a Jew, he was also a Roman citizen. And being a Roman citizen meant that he could travel throughout the entire Roman Empire, which he did, and preached and wrote about Jesus. One of the famous things he wrote about was salvation by grace through faith and not by works, which was a completely new concept to most people reading his letters. Now, because the Roman government saw Christianity as a threat, Christians had to worship in secret. There were underground caves known as catacombs where Christians would worship in secret. The ichthus, which is that fish you see on the screen there, maybe you've seen that on a car before, the Jesus fish it's sometimes called, that was the secret symbol of Christianity, so people would know if they were safe to talk to you. But thousands of Christians were persecuted and martyred, and this continued for 300 years in the Roman Empire. In fact, it continued until Constantine was crowned Roman emperor. We mentioned him briefly before. He was Roman emperor in the 300s AD, so he lived about 300 years after Jesus. And in 306 AD, he was crowned emperor. In 313, he signed the Edict of Milan, which legalized Christianity. This was so groundbreaking because now this religion that had been repressed and persecuted for hundreds of years in the Roman Empire, now all of a sudden it was legal and Christian persecution was ended. So this is another example of religious tolerance, similar to what Cyrus the Great of Persia did when he gave his people freedom of religion. Now, later on, Constantine himself converted to Christianity. He even replaced his face on the coins of the Roman Empire with Jesus' face on the coins. And he made it the official religion of Rome, thus replacing the Roman pantheon of gods, Roman polytheism. So most of the Roman world very quickly converted to Christianity. Remember, this is 25% of the world. And once Christians were able to worship in public and didn't have to be in secret anymore, once the emperor made it the official religion of Rome and converted himself, this made more and more people convert to Christianity too. So this is what made Europe Christian for centuries to come, still to this day, arguably. And later on, this is what made the Americas largely Christian, because when Europeans came to the Americas in the 1500s, they brought with them Christianity. And still to this day, North, South, Central America, the Caribbean is still largely Christian. So this is kind of ironic because the empire that crucified Jesus then became the empire that spread his teachings all around the world. Very unique kind of change here. So since the Christian church no longer had to meet in secret, Constantine said, we need to have a council. We all need to meet together to make sure we have a common faith, that we're all reading the same books in the Bible. And this was called the Council of Nicaea in the year 325. And this is where all of the bishops, all of the church leaders came to meet. And this unified Christians around a common biblical canon and common teachings and doctrines about God. By the 300s, the Western Roman Empire was really weakening. Okay, the western half, which you see at the top in the pink there, that was starting to decline. They had started to spread themselves too thin and were not nearly as strong as they used to be. And therefore, in the year 330, Constantine moved the capital from the city of Rome to the city of Byzantium, which you see on the map there. So for the first time in 800 years, Rome's capital was no longer Rome. It is now Byzantium, and he renamed it Constantinople after himself. Just a quick trivia fact, that city today is called Istanbul. Then in the year 476, the western half of the Roman Empire fell. The western half of the Roman Empire, including Rome and all of Italy, was conquered by a group of people known as the barbarians. And the barbarians included a lot of different groups, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and these were various non-Roman groups from Northern Europe. And while the western half of Rome fell, including the city of Rome itself, the eastern half of the empire was not overtaken. It remained very strong, and it became known as the Byzantine Empire. Its capital remained Constantinople. And the Byzantine Empire would remain a major power for about 1,000 years, going throughout the Middle Ages all the way until 1453. So a big question that historians ask, they continue to ask and debate this, is why did Rome fall? Why did this once invincible empire actually fall to a group of barbarians? Well, there are a lot of different theories. One is overexpansion, the fact that they expanded too far away from the capital city. That meant they couldn't control the area, and so when barbarians came to the gates, came to the edges of the empire, they were much weaker there and could not withstand their forces. Another theory is division, that there was too much internal division within the Roman Empire, too many different groups who had different values, and therefore they didn't fight together, but instead fought with each other, meaning fought against each other instead of together against somebody else. And then a final theory, which I think is a really intriguing one, is the idea that the Romans' embracing of Christianity is a reason why they fell. Because if you know much about the teachings of Christianity, there's a big emphasis on peace, on love, on forgiveness, and not so much on brute strength. Former religions would really emphasize strength and vitality in that way, being able to overcome your enemy. But Christianity was much gentler, much more peaceful, and valued forgiveness. And because of that, it's possible that the attitude of the Romans changed and their hearts softened. And because of that, they weren't strong enough to withstand the barbarian advance. In any case, Rome did fall, and that is seen as around the end of the classical era and the beginning of the post-classical era. So, just to review here, we have learned about ancient Egypt, which is right there, ancient India in the Indus Valley Civilization, ancient China, Israel, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, and Rome. So those are the major civilizations in ancient history that we have learned about. But there is one large part of the map that we have not even mentioned yet, and that would be the Western Hemisphere, the Americas, North and South America. What was going on there during the time of the ancient world that we've been talking about the past 3 days? Well, there were people there. We don't know exactly how they got there, but right now the theory is that they traveled from Asia to the Americas in this route on the screen. So a couple ways this might have happened. It's possible that during the Ice Age, this area in between Russia and Alaska was covered with ice, so people could walk across it. It's also possible that there was some sort of a land bridge that since has been covered up with water so that they could walk across it. We don't know for sure, but either way, we do know that people did come to the Americas and did live here during the time of these other ancient civilizations. Now, the population was much smaller in the Americas than it was in Afro-Eurasia. By the way, this is what we call Afro-Eurasia. It's a nice, tidy term, a quick way to say Africa, Europe, and Asia. Okay? So now going from Afro-Eurasia to the Americas, just one quick slide about what was happening there. Afro-Eurasian civilizations developed in complete isolation from American civilization for thousands of years. While it's likely that people from Afro-Eurasia migrated to the Americas, that was a very long time ago, and for thousands of years at this point, nobody in Afro-Eurasia knew the Americas existed, and nobody in the Americas knew that Afro-Eurasia existed, and they developed in complete isolation of each other. The population of the Americas was much, much smaller than Afro-Eurasia this entire time, something like 10% of what the population of the other half of the world was. One of the largest cities was Teotihuacan, which is near modern-day Mexico City. The largest city here, and it was 125,000 people. Okay, so about the size of Jackson, Mississippi. Not really all that huge, but it was the biggest city in all of the Americas at this point. The largest ancient civilization in the Americas was the Mayans. They lived in modern-day Mexico. They formed around 1500 BC, which is about the beginning of New Kingdom Egypt, but they reached their peak from 250 to 900 AD, so around the time of Constantine and then the fall of the Roman Empire. That's when the Mayans reached their peak, and their population was 2 million. By the way, the population of Mississippi is 3 million, so that can kind of give you a little perspective about how big the largest civilization in the Americas was with the Mayans. They had a written language. They had a very complex understanding of astronomy. And they also had a religion. They had a polytheistic religion, and one of the key components of that religion, unfortunately, was human sacrifice. So there's all sorts of evil that we can read about and learn about in human history. For example, slavery was a very common type of evil. Virtually every civilization had some form of slavery, unfortunately. Human sacrifice, however, is a pretty unique kind of evil. It's up there with things like genocide, something that doesn't really happen all that much in history, but it is extremely evil and harms many, many people. And the Mayans built these huge temples, for example, the one you see in the bottom picture there, Chichen Itza. And these were temples to their gods, where they would bring victims to the top, they would cut out their hearts while they were still living, and then kick them down the steps of the temple where they would die. And then sometimes there would even be cannibalism, just disgusting. And when Europeans and Africans came to the Americas in the 1500s, they were in complete shock by this. They had never heard of human sacrifice before. They didn't think that was a real thing that people did, and they were just completely abhorred by this. And that's one of the many examples of culture shock, which we'll talk about as we get to concepts like cultural exchange. So next, we are going to talk about the post-classical period, which leads us up to the year 1200.